She picked up her suitcase herself. No one offered to help. No one moved. The entire platform of Willow Creek stood watching as the railroad man read her name off his list, then shook his head and walked away. The job was gone. The man who promised it had changed his mind. And Eliza Hartwell, 25 years old, 700 miles from everything she had ever known, stood in the Montana summer heat with nowhere left to go. She did not cry. She lifted her chin, tightened her grip on the handle, and said quietly, but loud enough for every soul on that platform to hear, "Then I'll build something of my own." If you've ever had to start over when everything fell apart, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow Eliza's journey all the way to the end, and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1885 did not arrive gently in Willow Creek, Montana. It came hard and dry, the way most things came to the frontier, without apology, without softness, without any promise that it would get better before it got worse. The dust on the main street was thick enough to taste. The sun pressed down on the wooden storefronts like a hand pushing something into the ground. And the people who lived there had learned over years of difficult seasons and difficult choices not to expect too much from any single day. They were a practical people, cautious, not unkind, but not open, either the way a door can be unlocked without being open. So when the afternoon train pulled into the Willow Creek station and a young woman stepped onto the platform alone, the town noticed. Not loudly, not with pointed fingers or raised voices, but with the quiet, watchful attention of people who had learned that strangers arriving alone usually meant something was wrong somewhere. Eliza Hartwell did not look wrong. That was the first thing that confused them. She was dressed plainly but neatly, her dark blue traveling dress brushed clean despite the long journey. She carried one worn leather suitcase in her right hand and a small family Bible tucked under her left arm. She stood straight. She looked around the platform with clear, steady eyes, not the frightened, darting gaze of someone lost, and not the confident sweep of someone who owned the place. Something in between. Something that took in the dusty street, the wooden buildings, the wide Montana sky, and did not immediately decide what to feel about any of it. She was looking for someone. His name was Gerald Hatch. He had placed an advertisement in a Boston newspaper. 3 months earlier, a respectable position, it said, as housekeeper and cook for a working cattle ranch outside Willow Creek. Reasonable wages, a private room, steady work for a capable woman willing to commit to frontier life. Eliza had answered that advertisement with 2 things most women in her position did not have: a letter that said exactly who she was, and nothing left to lose. Her father's textile business had collapsed the previous autumn, not from mismanagement, but from a business partner who had slowly, quietly over 7 years drained the accounts and disappeared with what remained. The family home in Boston had been sold to cover debts. Her mother, who had been ill for 2 years before the collapse, had not survived long enough to see the end of it. And Eliza, who had spent those same 2 years nursing her mother, managing the household accounts, and pretending to visitors that everything was fine, had emerged from the wreckage of her family's life with $43, 1 suitcase, and a very clear understanding of a truth most women her age were still protected from knowing. The world did not hold space for women who needed rescuing, but it sometimes made room for women who refused to wait. She had written to Gerald Hatch with honesty that surprised even herself. She told him she had no experience with cattle. She told him she had never cooked over an open fire. She told him the frontier was not something she had romanticized or dreamed about. It was simply the direction in which an opportunity existed, and she intended to follow it. She told him she was educated, capable of managing accounts and correspondence, experienced in running a household of 8 people under difficult financial circumstances, and that she would work hard for any wage he considered fair. He had written back within 2 weeks. "The position is yours. Come in June. I'll meet you at the station." She had come in June. He was not at the station. She waited 40 minutes before she asked. The station master was a heavy-set man with a gray mustache who looked at her the way people look at paperwork they'd rather not deal with. "Gerald Hatch," she said. "He was supposed to meet me here. Has he sent word?" The station master looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the platform behind her, as if hoping someone else might appear to handle this. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "Gerald Hatch came by yesterday. And he left a message. Then I'd like to receive it." Another pause. The man reached under the counter and produced a folded piece of paper. He handed it over with the expression of someone delivering something unpleasant and wanting to be done with it quickly. Eliza unfolded it. The note was short. 4 sentences. "Miss Hartwell, I have reconsidered the arrangement. My men tell me you have no frontier experience. I need someone practical, not educated. I am sorry for the inconvenience." She read it twice. Not because she didn't understand it the first time, because she was giving herself the space of 4 seconds to feel what she felt before she decided what to do next. What she felt was fury. Not the hot, trembling kind that made a person cry or raise their voice. The cold kind. The kind that settles into your chest like a stone and stays there useful, hardening into something that might actually help you survive what comes next. She folded the note carefully. She put it in her coat pocket. She turned around. The platform had filled during her 40 minutes of waiting. Workers moving crates. Families greeting arrivals. A group of cowboys who had come to collect a delivery. A woman selling bread from a basket. The station master had stepped outside to speak with someone, and now the entire visible street of Willow Creek had a clear sightline to a young woman standing alone beside a single suitcase, with no one to meet her and nowhere to go. She was aware of every pair of eyes. She did not lower hers. A woman at the edge of the platform, perhaps 50, sharp-faced, wearing a hat that had seen better years, leaned toward the woman beside her and said not quietly enough, "That's the Hartwell girl. Gerald sent her away before she even arrived. Said she was too soft, too Eastern." "Can't blame him," the other woman replied. "What does a Boston girl know about ranch work?" "Nothing. That's the point." Eliza heard every word. She had spent 2 years managing her family's quiet collapse, while people outside the house assumed everything was fine. She had learned to hear things people assumed she couldn't hear. She had learned to carry weight people assumed she couldn't carry. She picked up her suitcase. She looked at the street ahead of her, the unfamiliar storefronts, the horses tied along the rail, the wide dirt road that ran through the middle of a town that had not invited her and did not want her. And she said quietly to no one in particular, and to herself specifically, "If this place doesn't want me, I'll build a place that does." That was when she heard a voice behind her. Calm, low, not urgent. "You'll need somewhere to stay tonight before you start building." She turned. I was leaning against the post at the edge of the platform. Not the kind of leaning that was casual, but the kind that said a person had been standing in one place long enough that leaning had become the natural conclusion. He was tall, with the weathered, still quality of a man who spent most of his life outdoors, and very little of it explaining himself. Dark hair. A jaw that had not seen a razor in several days. Eyes that were a shade of gray-green she had no previous category for. I was watching her the way you watch a fire. Not because you're afraid of it, but because you want to understand what it's doing. "Caleb Dawson," he said. He did not extend his hand immediately. He waited. She noticed that. The waiting. Most men in her experience either grabbed your hand or ignored the possibility entirely. He waited to see what she would do. She extended her own hand. "Eliza Hartwell," she said, "and I don't need charity." Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like recognition. "I know," he said. "I'm not offering it." She studied him for a moment. "Then what are you offering?" "A job," he said. "Housekeeper. Cook. Ranch manager for the domestic side of things. 3 months to start. Fair wages. I'll tell you the number before you decide, not after. Private room in the main house. And nobody on my property who treats you the way this town just did." She looked at him steadily. "You heard what they said." "I heard what they said," he confirmed. "And you don't share their opinion." He looked at her for a moment, not at her dress, not at her suitcase, not at the Bible under her arm. He looked at her face, specifically at the place behind the eyes where a person's real reaction lives, the one they're managing, but not quite hiding. "What I saw," he said, was a woman who got handed the worst possible news in front of an entire town and didn't fall apart. What I saw is exactly what I need at my ranch. He paused. The opinion part is yours to form about me. She thought the most honest thing anyone had said to her in 6 months. What's the wage? She asked. He told her. It was more than Gerald Hatch had offered. 3 months, she said. I'll give you 3 months. If either of us decides it isn't working, we end it without argument. Fair, he said. And I'll need to know what the ranch needs before I agree to what I'll be responsible for. I won't commit to something I haven't seen. He looked at her. That's reasonable. I have conditions of my own, she continued. I manage the household as I see fit. I don't take direction from ranch hands about what belongs in my domain. And if there is something I don't know how to do, I will tell you directly rather than pretend otherwise. A beat of quiet. Then he said, Those are the most sensible conditions anyone has ever offered me. She picked up her suitcase. He reached for it. She held on. I carry my own things, she said. He let go without argument. They walked off the platform together into Willow Creek, a town that watched them with the full attention of people who had nothing better to wonder about, and the certainty on both sides of the street that whatever was happening between these two people was probably going to be interesting. Neither Caleb nor Eliza paid the town any attention at all. The ride out to Dawson Ranch took just under an hour. They did not talk for the first 15 minutes. This did not trouble Eliza. She had grown up in a house where silence meant someone was unhappy with someone else. But in the years since she had learned to manage difficult things alone, she had come to understand that silence could also mean something simpler. Two people existing in the same space without needing to fill it. Caleb Dawson, she decided, was a man who did not speak unless he had something to say. She respected that immediately. When he did speak, it was practical. Ranch runs about 400 head of cattle. 12 full-time hands, 9 men, 3 young fellas who came on last year. I've got a foreman named Walt Greer who handles the work outside. What he doesn't handle is everything inside. That's been empty for a while. How long? She asked. A pause. 3 years, he said. She did not push on why. She filed it away. Who was cooking in that time? Rotation, he said. Whoever was willing. Nobody was willing for long. And the household accounts. He glanced at her sideways. You're asking about accounts before you've seen the kitchen. I'm asking in order of importance, she said. A kitchen can be cleaned. Accounts in bad shape take longer to correct. Another pause. She couldn't tell if he was irritated or thinking. Accounts are managed, he said finally. Not comfortably, but managed. Then I'll look at them this week if you'll allow it. He was quiet for a moment. I'll allow it, he said. The wagon moved through landscape that Eliza was not equipped to describe, not because it wasn't striking, but because she was from a place where striking things were buildings and bridges and the careful arrangement of human intention. This was something else entirely. It was land that had not been arranged by anyone. It simply was in all directions, enormous and indifferent, and somehow not frightening the way she had expected. Challenging. Like an argument you haven't decided yet whether you want to win. You've never been west before, Caleb said. It was not a question. No. What do you think of it? She looked at the horizon for a moment. I think it doesn't particularly care what I think of it. He said nothing for a moment. Then, that's the most accurate thing anyone's ever said about Montana. She felt something ease slightly in her chest. Not comfort exactly. More like the beginning of permission to be in a place. The ranch hands were waiting when they arrived. Not formally, not lined up, not expecting them, but the kind of waiting that happens when word travels faster than a wagon and 12 men find reasons to be near the front of the property. At the same moment a new person is arriving. They were studying her. She studied them back. Walt Greer, the foreman, was a compact man in his 50s with a sun-worn face and the posture of someone who had spent decades carrying things, not just physical things. He tipped his hat without warmth. Not hostile, evaluated. Miss Hartwell, he said. Mr. Greer, she replied. I'd like to speak with you tomorrow morning about the supply schedule if you have time. He blinked. Supply schedule. For the kitchen. I'll need to understand what's been ordered, what's on hand, and what I'll need to change. I don't want to step on arrangements that are working. I only want to know which ones aren't. Walt looked at Caleb. Caleb's expression said nothing useful. Walt looked back at Eliza. I suppose I have time, he said. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, he agreed. She had not asked for his approval. She had offered him a meeting and a time, and in doing so had made accepting easier than refusing. It was a thing her father had taught her years ago, before everything fell apart. Never ask permission for what you intend to do. Ask only when and how. The younger hands were watching from a distance. She turned and addressed them directly, which visibly startled at least 3 of them. I don't know your names yet, she said, but I will by Thursday. I'd like to know what each of you prefers to eat and what you can't stomach. I won't promise I can always accommodate it, but I'd rather know than guess. Silence. Then a young voice from the back slight with a nervous edge beneath it said, I hate turnips, ma'am. A ripple of laughter moved through the group. No turnips, she said. I'll remember. His name, she would learn the next morning, was Billy. He was 17 years old, the youngest hand on the ranch, and had been hired by Caleb 6 months earlier because he had nowhere else to go. He hid his homesickness behind jokes that were almost funny and kept a photograph of his mother in the breast pocket of his work shirt. She wouldn't learn that last part until later. But she noticed the jokes. She noticed the way laughter came too quickly and faded too fast. She noticed everything. Time. The kitchen was worse than she had expected. Not filthy clearly, someone had made a reasonable attempt at maintenance. But it had the neglected quality of a space that had been used without being understood the way you can tell when a room has not had someone in it who cared about it. The stove needed attention. The pantry was stocked with the wrong things. Too much preserved beef, not enough flour. A peculiar absence of anything fresh. The table had a long scratch across the middle that had never been attended to. She stood in the center of it for several minutes. Caleb appeared in the doorway behind her. I know it needs work, he said. Everything needs work, she replied without turning around. The question is whether the work is worth doing. Is it? She turned. He was leaning against the door frame, that same quality of stillness she had noticed at the station. Watching. Yes, she said. But I'll need a budget for supplies, and I'll need it in writing. Not because I don't trust a verbal agreement, but because if there's a dispute later, I don't want either of us relying on memory. He pushed away from the doorframe and disappeared. He came back 4 minutes later with a piece of paper and a pen. He wrote a number at the top of the page, signed his name, and handed it to her. She looked at the number. It was generous. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. It's a business arrangement. It is, she agreed. And I'm thanking you for making it a reasonable one. He seemed uncertain what to do with that. He left. She turned back to the kitchen and began making a list. The first week was a study in resistance, not open resistance. The Dawson Ranch hands were not unkind men, but they were men who had built a workable order out of chaos. Over 3 years, and workable orders do not give way to new arrangements without a certain amount of friction. The first friction came from a man named Curtis Broad, capable 15 years on the ranch, and accustomed to ordering supplies himself when the kitchen ran low. He arrived on the 3rd morning to find Eliza in the middle of reorganizing the pantry and told her with the tone of a man explaining something to someone who doesn't know better that the dried beef had always been stored on the left side, and that was where it was going to stay. She stopped what she was doing. She turned. She looked at Curtis for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "Where the beef is stored affects only the person storing and retrieving it. That's me now. If I put it on the right side, does it change your workday in any way?" Curtis opened his mouth. "Specifically," she said. "Not generally." He closed his mouth. "No," he said after a moment. "Then I'm going to put it on the right side," she said, "because when you're moving quickly in the morning and you reach for something you need in the dark before sunrise, you should know where your hand is going. Left side is proteins. Right side is dry goods. Consistent every time, no thinking required. She paused. Unless you can think of a reason that doesn't work. He stared at her. Then he turned around and walked out. Walt Greer, who had been standing in the hallway and heard the entire exchange, appeared in the doorway a moment later. "He's going to be difficult," he said. "He's going to be fine," she replied. "He just needs to understand that I'm not reorganizing his kitchen. I'm organizing mine." Walt studied her for a moment. 7 o'clock tomorrow, he said. "About the supply schedule." "I'll have coffee ready," she said. He almost smiled. By the end of the first week, the meals were different. Not dramatically, she wasn't trying to impress. She was trying to feed people properly, which is a different thing. The portions were more consistent. The bread was fresh 3 times a week instead of once. There was actual variety, not fancy, but varied, which matters more than people admit when you eat in the same place every single day. The first real sign that something was shifting came on a Thursday evening. She had made a stew, nothing complicated, but made the way stew should be made, which requires more time than most people are willing to give it. She had left it to cook slowly all afternoon while she worked on the supply accounts, and by the time the men came in from the fields, the smell had been moving through the air for 2 hours. Every man sat down before she had to call them. Billy, sitting at the far end, took one bite and said quietly, probably not meaning to be overheard, "This is the first good meal I've had since I left home." She heard it. She did not say anything at the table. She went back to the kitchen, and she stood for a moment with her back against the wall, and she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of something that was not quite grief and not quite relief, but was in the territory of both the particular feeling of a person who has spent a long time surviving and has just been given the first small evidence that it might have been worth it. Then she went back out to collect the dishes. Caleb noticed. He noticed the way the men started coming back a few minutes earlier from their work, not enough to be remarked upon, but enough to tell you something. He noticed that the table, which had been cleared immediately after meals for years, was now sometimes still occupied 20 minutes later by 2 or 3 men talking. He noticed that Billy had stopped eating in the corner by himself and had begun sitting with the older hands. He also noticed things that had nothing to do with the kitchen. He noticed that on Tuesday afternoon, Eliza had sat with old Thomas Briggs, the ranch's oldest hand, 61 years old, moving slower in the cold mornings than he used to, and spent 40 minutes listening to the man talk about his grandchildren in Kansas without once checking how much time was passing. He noticed that she had, without fanfare or announcement, begun leaving Thomas's portion of the morning coffee on the side table closest to the door, rather than the main table, which meant the man didn't have to cross the whole room on mornings when his joints were troubling him. Thomas hadn't said anything about it. Eliza hadn't said anything about it. But Thomas moved through the rest of his mornings with a quality that Caleb could only describe as a little lighter. He stood on the porch one evening watching the sky turn the colors. It turned in Montana when the sun started making its way down, and he tried to identify what exactly was different. The ranch was quieter. Not silent, there was still laughter, still the sounds of working men at the end of a long day. But the quality of the quiet had changed. It was the kind of quiet that happens when people are comfortable, rather than the kind that happens when they are simply tired. He had forgotten that second kind existed. He stood there a long time thinking about that. Inside, he could hear Eliza moving through the kitchen, the small sounds of someone who knows where everything is. He had not expected, when he extended his offer at the platform, to feel anything beyond the practical satisfaction of solving a problem. He had a ranch that needed managing. She needed a job. He had seen her composure and recognized something useful in it. That was what he had told himself. Standing on the porch now, listening to the sounds that had quietly made his house feel inhabited again, he understood that he had been managing with great discipline not to think too closely about the rest of it. He went inside. She was at the table, the account book spread open in front of her, working by lamplight. She did not look up immediately when he came in. "The supply order for next month," she said without preamble. "I want to add $15 to the line for kitchen equipment. The current pans are at the end of their useful life, and I'd rather replace them before they fail than after." "Fine," he said. "I also want to talk about the contracts with the Millbridge supplier. You're paying more than the current market rate for dried goods. There are 2 suppliers in Helena I'd like to write to." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Show me," he said. She turned the account book toward him. They spent the next hour at the table going through numbers. She had a clear, logical way of explaining things, not simplified, but not unnecessarily complicated either. She presented problems with the solution already half-formed. She asked his opinion on the parts that required his knowledge of the land and the operation. She did not pretend expertise she didn't have. She did not minimize what she did know. It was, he realized, the most useful conversation he had had about the ranch in years. Not because she was telling him anything he didn't already know in most cases, but because she had organized what he already knew into a shape that made it easier to act on. When they finished, she closed the book and looked at him. "You're good at this," he said. It came out before he'd decided to say it. She looked at him for a moment. "I had to become good at it," she said. It wasn't a choice. He wanted to ask her more about that. He understood something about things that aren't choices, about the particular education that comes from difficult circumstances that leave you with specific skills and the permanent memory of what it cost to acquire them. He didn't ask. Not tonight. "Good night, Miss Hartwell," he said. "Good night, Mr. Dawson," she said. He went to his room, and somewhere in the space between lying down and sleep, he noticed that he had, for the first time in a very long time, spent an evening not dreading the next morning. That was enough for now. He filed everything else away. On the 14th day, the stranger who had arrived with 1 suitcase and an offer the town of Willow Creek would have laughed at stood in the middle of a working cattle ranch at 6 in the morning, watching the hands move out to their work, and understood something that had been quietly arriving since the moment she stepped onto the platform. She was not surviving this place. She was learning it. The difference, she understood, was everything. What she did not yet understand, what would not become clear for weeks when the real trouble arrived and everything that had been quietly building was forced suddenly into the open, was that the ranch was also learning her. And so was the man who owned it. Whether either of them were ready for what that meant was a question that would have to wait. Because something was coming. Something that had been moving toward Dawson Ranch long before Eliza Hartwell ever stepped off a train. And when it arrived, nothing about this quiet, careful, practical arrangement was going to survive unchanged. The morning after Eliza Hartwell reviewed the account books with Caleb Dawson, she woke up before anyone else on the property. Not because she had slept well. She hadn't. She had lain in the narrow bed in the room off the main hallway and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours, running numbers in her head, reorganizing the supply lists, thinking about Thomas Briggs's joints and Billy's loneliness and the long scratch on the kitchen table that nobody had bothered to fix. Her mind did not know how to stop working. It never had. Her mother used to say that Eliza had been born with an engine that didn't have an off switch, and that someday it would either save her or exhaust her, and probably both. She got up at 5. By 5:30 the coffee was made, the stove was going, and she was standing at the kitchen window with a cup in her hands, thinking about the 14 days she had already been on this ranch and what she had learned and what she still didn't know. What she knew, the men worked hard. The land demanded it, and they gave it without complaint, which meant either they were satisfied or they had learned not to expect better. She hadn't decided which yet. What she knew, the accounts were in worse shape than Caleb had indicated. Not collapsing, but strained in the particular way that happens when a person has been managing from crisis to crisis for so long that they've stopped being able to see the whole picture. What she knew, Caleb Dawson was not a man who asked for help easily, and the fact that he'd offered her the job at the station that day had cost him something, even if he'd never admit it. What she didn't know yet, why the ranch had gone 3 years without someone managing the inside of it. What had happened? What had been lost? And whether whatever it was still lived in the walls of this house the way she suspected it did. She heard footsteps in the hallway. Thomas Briggs appeared in the doorway, moving slowly the way he always did in the early hours, one hand briefly touching the doorframe as he came through. He stopped when he saw her, surprised despite himself. "You're up early," he said. "So are you." He looked at the side table. The coffee was already there on the small tray she'd positioned 3 days ago and never mentioned. He walked to it without saying anything, poured a cup, and stood for a moment with his back half turned to her. "Cold this morning," he said. "It is," she agreed. He turned around. He had the careful expression of a man who wants to say something and isn't sure it's his place. "You don't have to do that," he said, nodding toward the tray. "I can walk to the main table." "I know you can," she said. "I just figured this was more convenient." A pause. "It is," he said. He took his coffee to the chair near the window. His chair she had come to understand, the one. No one sat in without realizing it was his, and he sat down, and for a while they were simply two people in an early morning kitchen not talking, which was its own kind of conversation. Then Thomas said without looking at her, "3 years ago there was a woman who used to make coffee before anyone else was up." Eliza was quiet. "Her name was Clara," he said. "Caleb's wife." The word landed in the kitchen like something physical. Eliza set her cup down slowly. She had suspected there was a Clara-shaped absence in this house. She had felt it in the way Caleb never stayed in the kitchen longer than he had, to the way the main house bedroom door was always closed, and nobody ever mentioned it, the way the men spoke about the ranch's past, with a careful vagueness that suggested a subject they had collectively agreed to leave alone. "What happened?" she asked. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Fever," he said. "It moved fast. There wasn't time to get a doctor from Helena. Caleb stayed with her 3 days straight, didn't sleep, didn't eat. When it was over..." He stopped, turned his cup in his hands. "When it was over, he went back to work. Next morning. Like stopping wasn't something he could afford." Eliza said nothing. "He's a good man," Thomas said. "Not defensively, just truthfully. A hard man to know, but a good one. He doesn't say what he feels, but what he does say he means. And what he does..." A pause. "A man who keeps 12 families fed through 3 bad years because he won't sell land that other people need to survive tells you what he is better than any words can." She looked at Thomas. "You didn't have to tell me that," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I figured somebody should." He finished his coffee. He set the cup down on the tray. He pushed himself up from the chair with the particular effort of a man whose body is older than his intention, and he moved toward the door. At the threshold he stopped. "The table," he said without turning. "The scratch in the middle. Clara got it when she was moving a stoveplate. Caleb's never fixed it because fixing it would mean..." He didn't finish the sentence. "Anyway, I thought you should know before you took sandpaper to it." He left. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment. Then she went to the table and looked at the scratch. Long diagonal, faded with 3 years of use. She put her hand on it lightly. She would not fix the scratch. Not because she was afraid to, but because she understood now that some things in a house are not broken. Some things are simply marked. That morning at breakfast, something shifted. Not dramatically, there was no announcement, no visible moment anyone could have pointed to. But Eliza had spent her adult life reading rooms the way a sailor reads weather, and she felt it the moment the men came in and sat down. They were looking at her differently. Not with suspicion this time, with something closer to assessment. Like they'd received new information about her overnight and were quietly updating their understanding. She found out why 20 minutes into the meal, when Curtis brought blunt. Curtis, who had argued about the pantry organization on day 3, reached across the table and handed Billy the breadbasket before the boy had to ask for it. It was a small thing, but it hadn't happened before. She said nothing. She collected plates and refilled coffee and kept moving, and she turned the small observation over in her mind all morning, trying to understand what had changed. It wasn't the food, though the food had improved. It wasn't the organization, though the household ran more smoothly. It was something more specific than that, and it took her until mid-morning to identify it. She had started thanking people, not performatively, specifically. When Walt Greer spent an extra hour repairing the roof above the kitchen without being asked, she found him afterward and said, "The leak above the north wall is gone. I noticed this morning. Thank you, it makes a real difference." When young Billy hauled extra firewood before the temperature dropped, she said, That was good thinking about the cold front. I wouldn't have thought ahead that far yet. Specific. True. Without excess. She had learned the particular power of being seen for the exact thing you actually did not, for a general idea of your usefulness. It cost nothing to give it. But the thing it gave back was not nothing at all. The men had started quietly to do things without being asked. This was the first evidence that she had started to build something that had not previously existed. She was not yet sure what to call it. She filed it away and kept working. It was Walt Greer who came to her at 11 o'clock that morning with the look of a man carrying something he'd rather not. "We have a problem," he said. "Tell me." "The northern fence line, something's wrong with the water access on that edge of the property. The cattle are being moved further than they should be every day. It's wearing them down. By winter, if it's not fixed, we're looking at weak stock." She looked at him. "That's Caleb's decision, not mine." "Caleb knows," Walt said. "He's known for 2 months. The problem is the repair requires diverting funds from somewhere, and every time I put it to him, he puts it off." A pause. "I thought you might look at the accounts and see if there's a way through that he's not seeing." Eliza was quiet for a moment. "You're asking me to do something that's outside my agreement," she said. "I'm asking you to look at some numbers," Walt said. "That's your area. What you do with what you see is your business." She looked at him carefully. Walt Greer was not a man who asked for things. She understood that about him already. The fact that he was here asking meant the problem was real and his worry was genuine. "I'll look tonight," she said. "Don't tell Caleb yet." Walt nodded. He turned to leave. "Walt," she said. He stopped. "How long have you been on this ranch?" 18 years, he said. "Then you know what it was before," she said, "and you know what it needs to be again." He looked at her for a moment, the long, unreadable look of a man reassessing something. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and walked away. She found the space in the accounts that evening. It was not obvious. It required moving 3 months of forward supply orders into a slightly longer timeline, renegotiating the terms with the Helena supplier she had already been planning to contact and redirecting the savings into the fence repair fund. It was not elegant, but it was sound. She put it on paper in her clearest handwriting and sat with it for 20 minutes, making sure she hadn't made a mistake. Then she took it to Caleb. How was on the porch the way he often was in the evenings. She had come to understand that this was where he went when he needed to think without being bothered by it. Not hiding, but creating a specific kind of quiet space for himself that the rest of the day didn't allow. She sat down in the chair beside him without asking permission. He looked at her. She handed him the paper. He read it. He read it again. "You moved the Millbridge order to a quarterly schedule," he said. "They'll accept it. I've already written to them." "You already—" He stopped. "I hadn't approved this yet." "I wrote to ask about their terms," she said. "Not to commit. The decision is yours. I just wanted you to have accurate information before you made it." He looked at the paper again. "This would cover the fence repair," he said. "Entirely. With $40 remaining," she said, "which I'd recommend holding in reserve for the winter." A silence. Outside, the sky was doing something extraordinary, but neither of them looked at it. They were looking at the paper in Caleb's hands, and the question it raised, which was not really about the fence repair at all. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "You're not paying me to only cook," she said. "You told me at the station you needed someone for the domestic side of operations. Managing accounts is domestic operations. Most people in your position would have kept to the kitchen and stayed clear of the financial decisions. Most people in my position haven't had to rebuild their family's finances from a position of crisis," she said. "I know what these numbers look like when they're ignored too long." He set the paper on his knee and looked at her directly. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Not suspiciously, genuinely. The way a person asks when they actually want to know. She looked back at him with equal directness. "Because this ranch is worth saving," she said. "And because nobody has been helping you save it, and that's a waste." Something moved across his face, not quite the wall he usually maintained, but a shift in it. A brief opening. "The fence repair," he said. "I'll authorize it tomorrow." "Good," she said. She stood up. "Miss Hartwell," he said. She paused. "The account books," he said. "I want you to have full access going forward. Not just reviewing, managing." She turned back. "That's a significant expansion of my role," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." She held his gaze. "I'll need that in writing," she said. He almost smiled. "I'll have it on your desk by morning," he said. The third week brought the first real confrontation. His name was Roy Dawes, and he was one of the ranch hands who had been on the property for 2 years, long enough to feel ownership over the way things worked, but not long enough to have known them when they worked well. He was the kind of man who expressed his discomfort through small acts of erosion, not open defiance, but the consistent grinding kind that wears at things over time. He began leaving the kitchen in worse condition than he found it. Small things. A spilled cup not wiped up. Firewood stacked in the wrong place. Tools left where they created extra work for whoever came after. Each one individually dismissible as carelessness. Together they formed a pattern. Eliza said nothing for 3 days. She did not say nothing because she was afraid. She said nothing because she was watching, and watching required silence. And she had learned long ago that a person who responds to every small provocation gives up the advantage of knowing exactly what they're dealing with before they decide how to deal with it. On the 4th day, Roy came back from the morning shift and walked past her in the kitchen doorway with the particular deliberate indifference of someone who has decided they are above acknowledging a person's presence. She stepped into his path. He stopped. She was a head shorter than him and 70 pounds lighter, and she stood in front of him with the complete unhurried confidence of a woman who had faced down a Boston bank on behalf of her dying father's estate and walked out with more than anyone expected. "We haven't spoken directly," she said. He looked at her with an expression that was trying to be bored. "I've noticed some issues in the kitchen and common areas over the past 4 days," she said. "I'm not going to list them. You know what they are. I'm going to tell you once clearly what I expect going forward, and I'm going to ask you once clearly if you have a problem you'd like to discuss openly." Roy's jaw tightened. "I don't have a problem," he said. "Good," she said. "Then we won't have this conversation again." She stepped aside. He walked past her. She went back to the kitchen. That evening, Walt Greer found her at the account books and sat down across the table without being invited. "Roy's been talking," he said. "I expected that. He's saying you're stepping outside your role, that you've got no business in the accounts, and that Caleb's letting an outsider run things that ought to stay with the men who've been here." She looked up from the ledger. "What do you think?" she asked. Walt was quiet for a moment. "I think," he said carefully, "that in 3 weeks the men are eating better. The supplies are organized. The kitchen runs on a schedule for the first time in 3 years. The fence repair has funding, and Thomas Briggs doesn't have to stand in a cold doorway waiting for his coffee in the morning." A pause. "I think Roy's been here 2 years, and in those 2 years, he hasn't fixed one single thing." Eliza held his gaze. "Thank you, Walt." "Don't thank me," he said, standing up. "Just keep doing what you're doing." He left. She went back to the accounts. The first full month passed, and at the end of it, Caleb Dawson did something he had not done since Clara died. He came to dinner at the table, not to take a plate to the porch, not to eat standing at the counter while reviewing papers. He came to the table at the time Eliza had established as the dinner hour, and he sat down with his men and he ate. Nobody made a remark about it. But the quality of the meal that evening was different, not the food, but the atmosphere of it. 12 men and 1 woman and a rancher eating together around a table, the sounds of a shared meal filling a room that had been silent for 3 years. Billy leaned over to Thomas at some point during the meal and whispered something that made the old man laugh, a real laugh, not the polite kind. Eliza heard it from the kitchen. She stood still for a moment listening to it. Then she picked up the coffee pot and went back in. It was 2 days after the first real dinner together that she saw the other side of Caleb Dawson, the part he kept behind everything else, behind the practicality and the steadiness and the careful management of everything he allowed himself to feel. She had gone to the barn to check on a supply delivery that had arrived late, and she found him there standing with a horse she had not seen him near before. A dark roan older kept in the far stall. He had his hand on the animal's neck and was talking to it in a low voice, and she couldn't hear the words. Didn't try to. But the posture told her everything the words didn't. He was not a man alone in a barn with a horse. How was a man alone with the last thing that remembered his wife the way he did? She backed away before he could hear her. She went back to the kitchen. She thought about what Thomas had told her. About Clara and the fever, and the 3 days Caleb had stayed awake, and the morning after when he had gone straight back to work because stopping was not something he could afford. She had carried losses of her own, her father's collapse, her mother's death. The house in Boston sold to strangers. The particular grief of watching everything you grew up believing was permanent turn out not to be. She knew what it felt like to keep moving, because the alternative was something you couldn't look at yet. She understood Caleb Dawson with a precision she had not expected. And understanding someone she had learned is not the same as being safe from them. 3 days later, she was in the kitchen at noon when she heard raised voices outside. Not the ordinary friction of a working day, something sharper. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the doorway. Roy Dawes was in the middle of the yard, and he was not alone. 3 other men stood behind him, not aligned exactly, but present in the way that people are present when they've been told a story and are waiting to see if it's true. Caleb was standing 10 feet away from Roy, his arms at his sides, and his face had the particular quality of controlled restraint that is 1 degree removed from something else entirely. "I'm saying," Roy said loudly, "that you're letting a woman with no experience and no history here tell you how to run your ranch, and you're doing it because she's—" "Finish that sentence carefully," Caleb said. Roy hesitated, but he was too far in. "I'm saying it doesn't look right," he said, "and I'm not the only one who thinks it." Caleb looked at the men behind Roy. One by one, they looked away. One of them, a younger man named Pete, who had been following Roy's lead for 2 weeks, actually took a step back. "Anyone here who has a specific problem with how this ranch is being managed," Caleb said in a voice that was entirely quiet, "is welcome to bring it to me directly, anytime. My door is open." He paused. "Anyone who prefers to manage their complaints in the yard while I'm not present is going to find that I have very little patience for it." He looked at Roy. "You've been on this ranch 2 years, he said. In 2 years, the accounts were short. Every quarter the kitchen was a disaster. The fence on the north line was failing, and Thomas Briggs was eating cold food every morning, because nobody thought to consider that a 61-year-old man in a cold winter has different needs than a 25-year-old one." His voice did not rise. "Miss Hartwell has been here 30 days. The accounts are on track for the first time in 3 years. The fence is being repaired. And Thomas—" He stopped briefly. "Thomas laughed at dinner 4 nights ago. I hadn't heard that man laugh in 18 months. The yard was completely silent. "You have a job here," Caleb said to Roy. "If you want to keep it, do it. If you have a real concern about ranch operations, bring it to me like an adult." He paused. "We're done here." He turned and walked back toward the barn. Roy stood in the yard. He looked at the men behind him. Nobody met his eyes. Eliza, standing in the kitchen doorway, turned around and went back inside before Caleb could see that she had watched any of it. She put the kettle on. Her hands were not quite steady. Not because she was afraid of Roy Dawes. She had dealt with Roy Dawes before in various shapes and names, men who expressed their own dissatisfaction as an opinion about her. Her hands were not steady because of what Caleb had said, specifically the part about Thomas laughing, specifically the way he had said it. Not as evidence in an argument, but as if it mattered to him personally. As if the sound of an old man laughing at his dinner table was something worth defending with the same conviction he'd give to any other thing he valued. She picked up the kettle when it boiled. She poured the water, and she allowed herself exactly 1 moment of something that was not practical, and not strategic, and not useful. Something she had not permitted herself in a long time. something that sat in her chest quietly, like a door she hadn't decided yet whether to open. Then she closed it. She had 31 days left on her contract. There was work to do. That evening, Walt came to find her. Not with a problem this time. He sat down at the kitchen table and he said, "There's something you need to know." She waited. "The land developer who's been circling this region for 2 years," Walt said. "His name is Harlan Doyle. He's been buying up property north of here, some willing, some not so willing. He's made 2 approaches to Caleb about the northern pasture. And Caleb refused, both times, firmly." Walt folded his hands on the table. "But 3 days ago, someone in Willow Creek told me that Doyle has a new strategy. He's not approaching the landowners directly anymore." Eliza was very still. "He's finding another way in," she said. "That's what I'm told." "What kind of way?" Walt looked at her steadily. "He's looking for someone already connected to the property," he said. "Someone who might be convinced that selling is the better option." The kitchen was very quiet. Eliza set down the cup she was holding. "Who?" she said. Walt was quiet for the long moment. "Caleb has a brother," he said. "Nathan. They haven't spoken in 4 years. There was a disagreement about the ranch about decisions Caleb made after Clara died about money." He paused. "Word reached me today that Nathan Dawson was seen in Willow Creek, meeting with Harlan Doyle." The silence in the kitchen was different now, not the comfortable silence of early mornings and shared coffee. Something with weight in it. Something that was the beginning of the worst kind of trouble, the kind that arrives already wearing the face of family. Eliza looked at Walt. "Does Caleb know?" she asked. "Not yet," Walt said. She picked up her cup again. Put it down. "Give me until tomorrow morning," she said. "I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before we bring this to him." Walt studied her. "This is outside your agreement," he said. "This isn't accounts and kitchen management." "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." She met his eyes. "But I'm not leaving this ranch to be taken apart by someone who thinks none of us are paying attention." Walt looked at her for a long moment, the careful assessing look of a man updating his understanding of a person for the second time in a month. "7 o'clock, he said. "7 o'clock, she said. He nodded. He stood. He walked to the door. "Miss Hartwell," he said, turning once more. She looked at him. 30 days ago, he said, "I watched you walk off that platform, and I thought that woman won't last a month." He paused. "I was wrong," he said simply. He left. Eliza sat alone in the kitchen with the lamp burning low, and the account books open, and a new, harder kind of problem settling across the table, like something that had been traveling a long time and had finally arrived. She did not have the luxury of being afraid. She had work to do. And somewhere down the hall, a man who had carried everything alone for 3 years was about to find out that someone had arrived who was not willing to let him keep doing it, whether he was ready for that or not. She did not sleep that night, not because the problem was too large. She had faced large problems before, had learned to sit with them the way you sit with a fire close enough to use the heat without letting it burn you. But this problem had a particular quality that kept her awake in a way that pure logistics never had. This was not a supply shortage, or a failing fence line, or an account stretched too thin. This was the kind of trouble that arrived wearing a human face, and human-faced trouble required a different kind of thinking. Nathan Dawson, Caleb's brother. 4 years of silence, and now suddenly visible in Willow Creek, having coffee, or whatever men, like Harlan Doyle, offered over a table, with the one person in this territory who had the most to gain from Dawson Ranch changing hands. She turned that over in her mind until the lamp burned low and the house went quiet around her, and the only sound was the occasional creak of a building settling into a cold night. The question was not whether Nathan was dangerous. The question was, what kind of dangerous? A man who genuinely believed selling the ranch was the right thing could be argued with. A man who had made a private arrangement with Harlan Doyle and was maneuvering toward an outcome he'd already committed to, that was something else. That was a man already in motion, and a man already in motion required you to be further ahead than he expected anyone to be. By 5 in the morning, she had a list. Not written down, she had learned not to write certain things down until she understood who might find them. But the list existed clearly in her mind, ordered by urgency and by the particular kind of damage each item could cause if left unaddressed. First, find out exactly what Doyle had offered Nathan and whether Nathan had agreed to anything yet. Second, understand the legal structure of the ranch's ownership, whether Nathan held any residual claim from their parents' estate that could be leveraged. Third, determine what Caleb knew about his brother's financial situation, because men in financial distress were easier to move than men who were simply greedy. And fourth, the hardest one, decide when to tell Caleb and how much. She got up and made the coffee. Walt arrived at 7 o'clock exactly the way he always did. No earlier, no later. As if punctuality were a form of respect he offered to very few people and intended to honor when he did. He sat down. She poured. She put her list in front of him, still in her head, spoken aloud. He listened without interrupting, which she had come to appreciate as one of his better qualities. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The legal question," he said. "I can answer part of that. When Caleb's parents died, the ranch passed to Caleb outright, not split between the brothers. Nathan was given a cash settlement instead. That was the disagreement." He paused. Nathan believed the cash value they put on his share was too low. Caleb believed it was fair. Neither of them was entirely wrong, which is the worst kind of disagreement to have with a brother. "So Nathan has no legal claim on the property now," she said. "None." "But Doyle doesn't need a legal claim through Nathan," she said slowly. "He needs Nathan as leverage, as a pressure point. Someone who can walk through Caleb's door in a way a stranger can't." Walt looked at her. "That's what I think too," he said. "What's Nathan's situation?" she asked. "Financially." A pause. "Bad," Walt said. "Word is, he went into ranching on his own after the split south of here, and 2 bad winters took most of what he had. He's been working other men's land for the past year." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "A man who once owned something and lost it is a different kind of desperate than a man who never had it." She understood that. She understood it with her whole body, the specific weight of that kind of loss. "When did Nathan arrive in Willow Creek?" she asked. 3 days ago." "Has he contacted Caleb?" "Not yet." "He will soon," she said. "And when he does, he'll come with Doyle's offer already framed as concern. He'll make it sound like he's trying to help." Walt looked at her steadily. "You've seen this before." "Something like it," she said. "The man who destroyed my father's business spent 7 years making every bad thing look like help." The kitchen was quiet. "What do you need from me?" Walt asked. "I need to know the moment Nathan Dawson sets foot on this property," she said. "Before he speaks to Caleb if possible. After if necessary. But I need to know." "Done," Walt said. He stood. He picked up his hat. "There's one more thing," she said. He waited. "Caleb needs to hear this from me," she said. "Not from you, not from rumor, not from Nathan walking in the door. From me directly, with everything I know laid out plainly, so he can make a decision with full information." She paused. "But I need 2 more days to make sure I have all of it before I bring it to him." Walt studied her with the careful look of a man weighing loyalty in multiple directions. "2 days," he said finally. "Thank you." He left. She sat with her coffee for a long moment. Then she got up and started the bread because the men would be hungry at 8, and the world's worst problems did not stop requiring breakfast. The 2 days passed with a surface quiet that had something taut running underneath it, the way a rope looks still until you notice how hard it's being pulled from both ends. She worked. She managed the kitchen, reviewed the accounts, coordinated with Walt on the fence repair that was now underway on the northern line. She sat with Thomas in the mornings and talked about nothing important and everything that mattered. She noticed Billy was quieter than usual and found him on the second morning standing at the fence post at the edge of the property, looking east. "You thinking about home?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. He startled slightly, then steadied. "Little bit," he said. "Where is home?" "Ohio," he said. "Small town. My mother's there. My 2 sisters." How long since you've seen them? 8 months. He looked at the ground. Feels longer. She was quiet for a moment. Have you written to her? Some. Write more, she said. A mother reading a letter from her son is worth more than almost anything else you could give her. He looked at her sideways. You sound like you know. My mother died 14 months ago, she said simply. I would give a great deal for one more letter. Billy was very still. I'm sorry, he said. Write to your mother, she said. Today, if you can. She walked back to the house. Behind her, she heard his footsteps turn toward the bunkhouse. On the second day, she found what she had been looking for. It was in the county records she had written to the territorial office in Helena, under the guise of a supply-related inquiry, and received as part of a broader property document a reference to a lien filing. Harlan Doyle had not been idle. Months before he had ever approached Caleb directly, he had filed a preliminary claim on water rights adjacent to the northern pasture, a legal maneuver so technically obscure that most working ranchers would not have recognized it for what it was. A trap. Already set. Already waiting. If Doyle could demonstrate that the water source feeding the northern pasture had been disputed before the fence repair, before any significant investment of current funds, he could potentially complicate the property's resale value to anyone other than himself and strengthen a future legal claim. It was not a sure thing. But with a sympathetic judge and a rancher who didn't know it was happening, it could become a very difficult thing to fight. She sat with that document for a long time. Then she got up and went to find Caleb. How was in the far barn, doing the kind of solitary physical work that Eliza had come to understand was his version of thinking the work that kept the hands busy so the mind could move. He looked up when she came in and read her face immediately. What's wrong? He said. Not a question. I need to talk to you, she said. Sit down if you can. He sat on a bale without argument. She told him everything. She told it in order clearly, without softening it more than honesty required. Nathan in Willow Creek. The meeting with Doyle. The lien filing on the water rights. The legal strategy she had identified. The timeline she believed Doyle was working toward. She watched his face while she talked. He did not interrupt. He did not pace or slam his hand against anything. He sat with a controlled, concentrated stillness that she now recognized as his particular form of absorbing difficult information, processing it behind a very still surface. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. How long have you known? He said. Walt told me 2 days ago. I spent 2 days verifying before I brought it to you. I didn't want to give you incomplete information. Another pause. Nathan, he said, just the name. I don't know yet what he's agreed to with Doyle, she said. I don't know if he understands fully what Doyle is doing, or whether he's being used the way a tool gets used for a specific purpose by someone who sees it and not the man holding it. Caleb looked at his hands. He's my brother, he said. I know. It's been 4 years. I know. He looked up. You think he'd do this deliberately, help Doyle take the ranch? She met his eyes. I think he's a man who lost something he wanted and has had 4 years to build a story about why it wasn't his fault, she said quietly. And I think Harlan Doyle is very good at finding men with that particular story and making them an offer that sounds like justice. The silence in the barn was absolute. Then Caleb stood up. I need to see that document, he said. The lien filing. It's on the table in the house. He walked past her toward this door. Caleb, she said. He stopped. Whatever you decide to do about Nathan, she said, do it with all the information first. Don't let anger make the first move. He looked back at her. Is that what you did? He said. When the man took everything from your family, did you let the anger wait? She looked at him steadily. I let it wait long enough to be useful, she said. That's all I'm asking you to do. He held her gaze for a moment, something passing between them that was more honest than most conversations she'd had in her life. Then he walked to the house. She followed. I was still at the table with the document when Nathan Dawson walked through the front door of Dawson Ranch. Walt had sent Billy to warn her she'd had approximately 4 minutes' notice. 4 minutes was enough to stand up, move to a position in the kitchen doorway where she could see the front room and be present as a witness without making herself the center of what was about to happen. Nathan Dawson was younger than Caleb by 4 years, which made him look different in ways that had nothing to do with age. Where Caleb was weathered by deliberate work in open country, Nathan had the look of a man who had been worn down by circumstances rather than shaped by them. Same jaw, same coloring, but with an edge of something unresolved in his expression, the look of a man who had been arguing with a version of the past for so long it had become his permanent expression. He stopped when he saw Caleb at the table. He did not look at the document in Caleb's hands immediately. He looked at his brother's face, and whatever he saw there told him something, because his opening expression, which had been calibrated for something more like a surprised reunion, shifted into something more careful. "Caleb," he said. "Nathan." Caleb did not stand up. He set the document flat on the table with one hand. "Sit down." Nathan looked around the room. His eyes landed briefly on Eliza in the kitchen doorway. Cataloged her, filed her as a question to ask later. He sat. "You're in Willow Creek," Caleb said. "I am." "You've been there 3 days." A pause. "Yes." "And in those 3 days you didn't come here." Nathan's jaw tightened slightly. "I was going to. I needed time to—" "You met with Harlan Doyle," Caleb said. The pause this time was longer. "We had a conversation," Nathan said carefully, "about this ranch. About the situation. About—" Nathan stopped. He repositioned. She could see it happening, the recalibration of a man who arrived with a prepared version of this conversation and is now realizing the terrain has changed. "Caleb, I'm trying to help. The situation here is—" "The situation here," Caleb said, "is that a man named Harlan Doyle filed a preliminary lien on the water rights adjacent to my northern pasture 8 months ago, without my knowledge, without any legitimate claim." He pushed the document across the table. "Did you know that when you sat down with him?" Nathan looked at the document. His expression changed. Eliza watched it carefully, the way she watched everything carefully, looking for the specific quality of a reaction that told you whether the surprise was genuine or performed. What she saw was genuine, which was more complicated than the alternative, because it meant Nathan had not been fully informed by Doyle either. It meant he was being used in a way he hadn't entirely agreed to. It meant there was still something reachable in him. It also meant he was in deeper than he knew. "I didn't know about this," Nathan said. His voice had changed. The careful framing was gone. "Doyle told me it was a straightforward offer, that he wanted to purchase the northern acreage fairly, that the water access was negotiable." "Nothing Harlan Doyle does is straightforward," Caleb said. "I'm not his partner, Caleb. He approached me. He said you were struggling. He said the ranch was close to failing, and that if someone didn't intervene—" "Did he show you the accounts?" Caleb said. Nathan stopped. "Did he have any actual evidence that this ranch is failing? Or did he simply tell you it was and let you believe it because believing it was easier than asking for proof?" Nathan was silent. The silence was damning, and he knew it. "Nathan," Caleb said, and the single word carried 4 years of distance and something older beneath it, something that remembered a shared childhood and a table neither of them sat at anymore. "He used you to get to me. That's what he does." Nathan's hands were flat on the table. "I needed—" He stopped. "I know what you needed," Caleb said quietly. "I know what the last 4 years have been. I know about the ranch south of here and the winters and what you've had to do since." A pause. "I know all of it, Nathan. I kept up even when you didn't write." Something moved across Nathan's face that was too raw to look at directly. "Then why didn't you—" He stopped again, started again. "Why didn't you reach out if you knew?" "Because the last thing you said to me was that you didn't want my help," Caleb said. "And I was raised to respect what a man says, even when it costs me something." The room was completely still. Eliza did not move. She barely breathed. This was not her moment. She understood that with complete clarity. This was two brothers in a room with 4 years between them, and the most useful thing she could do was remain absolutely still and let it happen. Nathan looked at the document again. "What does this lien mean?" he said. "Practically. It means Doyle has been planning to force a sale for at least 8 months, Caleb said. It means if I don't respond to it legally, and soon it becomes a complication that makes this property harder to defend." He paused. "It means someone found it before it was too late." Nathan glanced toward the kitchen doorway, toward Eliza. "Her," he said quietly. Caleb looked at her too. "Her," he said. Nathan studied her for a long moment. "Who are you?" he said. She came out of the doorway and stood in the room properly. "Eliza Hartwell," she said. "I manage the household and accounts for Dawson Ranch." "Since when?" 5 weeks ago. He looked at Caleb. "You hired a stranger." "I hired the right person," Caleb said simply. Nathan looked back at Eliza. Something was working behind his eyes, the particular arithmetic of a man reassessing a situation faster than he would have chosen to. "The lien," he said to her directly. "How do we fight it?" She had not expected him to ask her. She saw Caleb register the same surprise. But she did not hesitate. "The filing was procedurally irregular," she said. "I identified 2 points in the documentation where Doyle's team didn't follow the correct territorial process. A competent lawyer in Helena, not Willow Creek. Helena can challenge the filing on procedural grounds and have it dismissed before it strengthens." She paused. "But it needs to happen within the next 30 days. After that, the filing timeline works against us." Nathan stared at her. "You found all of that," he said. "I was looking for it," she said. "Because someone needed to be." A long silence. Nathan turned back to Caleb. "I'm sorry," he said. The 2 words came out like something that had been held under pressure for a long time. Simple. Insufficient. True. "I should have come here. I should have come 4 years ago instead of I let Doyle tell me a story about this place because it was easier than coming to hear the real one." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You're here now," he said. It was not forgiveness exactly. It was not an erasure of 4 years. But it was something. A door opened. Nathan nodded once. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. What Nathan did over the next 48 hours surprised everyone on the ranch, including Caleb. He worked, without being asked, without direction, without any of the complicated positioning of a man trying to prove something. He simply picked up what needed doing and did it: fence posts, cattle movement supply, hauling with the focused energy of a man who had been looking for something to point himself at for years and had finally found the direction. Walt watched this with the cautious skepticism of a man who had seen many kinds of people arrive on a ranch and learned not to trust the first impression. Thomas watched it with something warmer. He said to Eliza on the second morning, "A Dawson who works like that either means it or he's the best performer I've ever seen." "Which do you think?" she asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I think a man performing doesn't keep at it after dark when nobody's watching," he said. "And Nathan Dawson was in the far paddock at 8 o'clock last night fixing what the afternoon crew left undone." She absorbed that. There was something else happening too. Caleb and Nathan were talking not long conversations, not the kind that resolved 4 years in an evening, but the small working conversations of 2 men who know the same land and are remembering that they know it together. She could see it in the way they moved around each other, a little less careful, a little less precise. Healing, she had learned, did not announce itself. It just quietly occupied the space where damage used to be. The crisis arrived on day 3, without warning, at 11 o'clock in the morning, in the form of Roy Dawes running toward the main house with an expression she had never seen on his face, not his usual resentment, not his manufactured boredom. Genuine alarm. "Miss Hartwell." He was breathing hard. She came out of the house immediately. "What happened?" "North pasture," he said. "The fence repair crew, someone cut the new wire last night. The cattle are out. All of them on that section, maybe 80 head moving north toward Doyle's boundary line." She did not waste time on reaction. "Get Caleb," she said. "Get Nathan. Get every man who can ride, now." Roy went. She went back inside for her coat and her boots and the account ledger with the fence repair documentation, because she had learned from her father's collapse that when property is in dispute, the paperwork that proves your investments and your decisions matters as much as the investments and decisions themselves. When she came outside, the ranch was in motion. Caleb was already on his horse, Nathan beside him. Walt marshalling the hands with the efficient authority of 18 years. Caleb looked at her at the ledger under her arm. "The fence repair records," she said. "If any of those cattle crossed the boundary line and Doyle claims they were on his land. By our negligence, we need documentation that we completed those repairs properly and that the wire was deliberately cut." He looked at her for exactly 1 second. "Ride with Walt," he said. She mounted. She had not been on a horse in 6 years. Her body remembered it badly for approximately 40 seconds, and then something older than recent history took over, and she rode. What followed was 2 hours of concentrated, exhausting work. 80 head of cattle do not move in neat lines. They move in the terrifying, unpredictable way of large animals, suddenly freed from the structures that have been organizing their existence, and getting them back required every person on the property working in coordination, calling, cutting, turning, pushing the herd back from a boundary line that Eliza now understood with physical urgent clarity was not just a legal marker, but the edge of everything. Nathan rode like a man who had grown up on this land and was remembering what that meant. Caleb rode like a man defending something he would die before surrendering. By 1 o'clock, the herd was contained. The boundary had held. No cattle had crossed onto Doyle's land. The group stood, horses blown, everyone breathing hard, nobody speaking for a long moment. Then Caleb turned to survey the cut fence. He crouched and looked at the wire. "Clean cuts," he said. "Not an animal, not where. Someone came out here last night with a tool." Walt was already behind him. 3 places, spaced deliberately. This was planned. Nathan stood nearby, looking at the cut wire with an expression she could not fully read. "Doyle," he said. "Or someone working for him," Caleb said. Nathan turned. "He did this because of me, because I went to him and he thought it meant he was close." "It's not because of you," Caleb said. "Caleb, Doyle was planning this before you ever walked into that room with him," Caleb said. "I have a document that proves it. He was going to do this regardless." He paused. "You didn't start this." Nathan was quiet. Then he said, "I want to help finish it." Caleb looked at his brother for a long moment. "Then stay," he said. 2 words. But between these 2 men on this land, it was more than that. It was the first real sentence of a conversation that had been waiting 4 years to begin. Chatay. That evening, Eliza sat down and wrote 2 letters. The first was to a lawyer in Helena, a man her father had corresponded with years ago, recommended for his particular expertise in property and water rights disputes. She laid out the procedural irregularities in Doyle's lien filing with precision, cited the specific territorial codes that had been violated, and requested his earliest available consultation. The second letter was harder to write. It was to the Territorial Bank in Helena, because while she had been managing the accounts with every tool available to her, she had identified a threat she hadn't yet told Caleb about. The ranch's operating loan. The one Caleb had been carrying for 3 years. The one the bank had been extending on the assumption of the ranch's stability. She had received a communication 3 days ago, mixed in with supply correspondence, easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully, that indicated Harlan Doyle had purchased a minority stake in the Territorial Bank's lending portfolio. It was not majority control. But it was enough, she suspected, to create pressure on specific loans at specific moments. Like now. Like the moment. A cattle loss, however temporary, and a cut fence, however easily repaired, could be presented to the right bank officer as evidence of instability. She sat with the pen in her hand for a long time. Then she wrote the letter, not with alarm, but with the cool, precise language of someone managing a situation rather than reacting to one. She documented the ranch's current financial position accurately and favorably. She referenced the fence repair investment and its completion date. She attached the supply renegotiation that had improved the quarterly position. She presented Dawson Ranch not as a property in trouble, but as a property that had recently made several significant operational improvements under new management. She signed it. She sealed it. She sat back. The lamp was burning low again. The house was quiet. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the ranch settling into night, the horses, the last movements of the men returning to the bunkhouse, the particular silence of a place that held 12 people and their lives. She became aware of someone in the doorway. Caleb. He had a way of appearing in doorways quietly, not sneaking, just moving through spaces without announcing himself the way a man moves when he has spent years in rooms he lived in alone. "You're still up," he said. "I'm finishing something." He came into the kitchen and sat down across from her. The same chair, the same lamp, a different evening, but with a weight to it that the other evenings hadn't carried. "I want to know what else you've found," he said. "All of it. Not just the pieces you think I'm ready for." She looked at him. He looked back. The expression on his face was not the controlled stillness she had learned to read as his management of difficult feelings. This was something else, something more open, more direct. The face of a man who had spent 3 years carrying everything alone and was with visible effort choosing to do something different. She picked up the sealed letter. She put it on the table in front of him. "The bank," she said. And she told him everything. He did not react the way she expected. She had prepared herself for the controlled fury she'd seen in the yard with Roy, or the compressed stillness from the conversation about Nathan, or any number of the ways a man receives news that the ground under him has been more deliberately undermined than he understood. He listened. He read the letter she had drafted. He set it down. And then he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not anger, not shock, but something stripped of all the layers he usually kept in place. Something that looked more than anything else like relief. The specific, exhausted relief of a person who has been fighting alone for so long that discovering someone else has been fighting beside them, even without being asked, even in secret, even without acknowledgement, undoes something that had been held very tight for a very long time. "You've been doing all of this," he said, "on top of everything else, without telling me." "I didn't want to bring you problems without solutions," she said. "My father used to say that anyone can deliver bad news. The useful thing is to deliver bad news with the path forward already mapped." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man." "He was," she said, "before it all fell apart. And even a little after." A silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that exists when two people are standing at the edge of something that has no name yet, and both of them know it. "Eliza," he said. She had not heard him use her first name before. It landed quietly. Like a stone dropped in still water, the initial sound small, but the rings moving outward in every direction. "What you've done here," he said. "In 6 weeks. What you've given this place." He stopped. Began again. "I hired you because I saw something on that platform that I recognized. I told myself it was practicality, the right skill for a problem I needed solved." She did not speak. "I wasn't telling myself the whole truth," he said. The lamp flickered. Neither of them moved. "Your contract ends in less than a month," he said. "I'm aware," she said. "I don't want to have a conversation about what happens at the end of it while we're in the middle of a fight for the ranch," he said. "It wouldn't be fair to you. You'd have no way to know if what I say is about the ranch or about—" He stopped. "About," she said quietly. He looked at her directly. "I don't know yet how to say the rest of it without saying it wrong," he said. "I need you to give me time to figure that out." She held his gaze. "You have time," she said. He nodded once. He stood. "The letter to the bank," he said. "Send it tomorrow. And the lawyer in Helena, whatever his fee is, it's authorized." "I'll send both in the morning," she said. He walked to the door. He stopped. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the work. For staying in front of things before they got to me. For doing it without making me feel like I'd failed." She looked at him. "You haven't failed," she said. "You've been fighting alone. Those are different things." He stood in the doorway for one long moment. Then he said quietly, so quietly she almost missed it, "Not anymore." He walked down the hall. She sat alone in the kitchen with the 2 letters on the table and the low lamp and the full weight of what had been said and not said, settling around her like something she had not prepared herself for. Not the trouble. She had prepared for the trouble. The other thing. The thing that had been building since a train platform in a Montana summer, since a man who watched from a distance and saw strength when everyone else saw a problem, since 6 weeks of shared mornings and account books and a table with a scratch across the middle that nobody had fixed. She had told herself repeatedly that this was a job, a 3-month contract, a practical arrangement between 2 people who needed different things from it. She sat in the kitchen at 11 o'clock in the night of the 42nd day and acknowledged without sentimentality, but with complete honesty, that she had been managing herself the way she managed everything else, with discipline and precision, and a careful refusal to look at anything that might complicate the work. The work was still there. The trouble was still coming. Harlan Doyle was not finished, and both of them knew it, and the hardest days of this fight were still ahead. But something had shifted in the kitchen that night. Something had been said imprecisely and partially, and with more courage than either of them had announced. She folded the letters. She put them by the door to be sent in the morning. She went to bed. And for the first time in 6 weeks, she slept without running numbers. The letters went out on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, the first response came back. Not from the lawyer in Helena, not from the bank, but from Harlan Doyle himself. A messenger arrived at Dawson Ranch at mid-morning, carrying a sealed envelope addressed to Caleb Dawson, and the quality of Doyle's response told Eliza everything she needed to know about the man. He was not angry. He was not threatening. He was polite. That was the most dangerous sign of all. Caleb read the letter at the kitchen table with Eliza and Nathan on either side of him. Walt stood near the doorway. Nobody spoke while he read it. When he finished, he set it flat on the table and looked at it for a moment. "He's offering to withdraw the lien," he said. Eliza was very still. "In exchange for what?" she said. "First right of purchase on the northern pasture if I ever choose to sell." Caleb looked up. "He's framing it as a neighborly compromise, a show of goodwill." Nathan made a sound that was not quite a word. Eliza picked up the letter and read it herself, carefully, twice. "He knows about the lawyer," she said. Everyone looked at her. "This letter was written after he found out we contacted Helena," she said. The language here, the framing of the lien as a misunderstanding, the sudden generosity. "This is a man who has just realized we found the procedural errors before his window closed." She set the letter down. "He's retreating to a position he can defend. He's trying to get a contractual right of first purchase locked in before we can get the lien fully dismissed, because once the lien is gone, he has no leverage at all." The kitchen was quiet. "If we sign this," Nathan said slowly, "we give him a permanent foot in the door." "Yes," Eliza said. Caleb looked at the letter. "We don't sign," he said. "Agreed," Eliza said. "But we respond. Formally through the lawyer acknowledging receipt and stating that the matter is under legal review. We don't refuse directly that tells him too much about where we are. We make him wait." Caleb looked at her. "And while he waits, she said, we finish what we started." The lawyer's name was Edmund Hale, and he arrived from Helena 4 days later, not because cases like this were his specialty, but because his letter back to Eliza had suggested it was exactly his specialty, and the 2 of them had corresponded enough in those 4 days that she had a clear picture of both the man and the strategy before he stepped off the train. How was 60 precise with the particular dry energy of a man who had spent 4 decades watching people make avoidable mistakes and had developed strong feelings about it? He read every document Eliza had assembled. He asked questions in the sharp sequential manner of someone for whom every answer was a building block towards something specific. He did not compliment her work. But when he reached the end of the file and looked up, he said, "Where did you study law?" She looked at him. "I didn't," she said. He looked at the file again. "You should have," he said, and went back to reading. The legal challenge to the Lion filing. Hale confirmed was solid. The procedural violations she had identified were real and significant. His estimate was that a territorial court would dismiss it within 3 weeks of filing, given the specific statutes she had cited. The bank position was more complex. He would need to examine the portfolio structure more carefully, but his preliminary read was that Doyle's minority stake did not give him enough direct influence to force a loan call without cause, and the documentation Eliza had assembled of the ranch's recent operational improvements made cause very difficult to establish. The stronger problem, Hale said sitting back, is time. Legal processes in this territory run slowly. Doyle knows that. He may be banking on the fact that the uncertainty itself creates enough pressure on the ranch's operating position to force a decision before the courts act. Then we need to remove the uncertainty from the operating position, Eliza said. Everyone looked at her. She had been turning this over for 3 days. She had not yet said it aloud because she had wanted to be certain before she did, and she was certain now. There's a way to stabilize the loan position that doesn't require waiting for the court, she said. She looked at Caleb. But it requires something I should have told you about earlier, and I apologize for not telling you sooner. Caleb's expression did not change. Tell me now. She folded her hands on the table. Before I came west, she said. My father's estate was settled. After the debts were cleared, there was a remainder not large but real. My father had put it in a separate account. My mother's family maintained specifically so that no creditor could reach it. It came to me when my mother passed. She paused. It's enough to pay down a significant portion of the operating loan. Enough to make the bank's position on this ranch undeniably sound enough that even with Doyle's stake, there would be no reasonable argument for calling the loan. The silence in the room was total. Caleb's jaw had tightened. She recognized it, the specific tension of a man receiving something he immediately wants to refuse. No, he said. Caleb. I will not take your inheritance, he said. The words were quiet and completely final in the way that mountains are final. I'm not offering it as a gift, she said. She had anticipated this. She had prepared for this exact conversation. I'm offering it as an investment, a formal one, documented, with terms. Terms, he repeated. A written agreement. The amount I contribute reduces the operating loan principal. In exchange, I receive a percentage of the ranch's annual operating profit for a period of 5 years, at which point the investment is considered repaid and the agreement dissolves. She paused. It's a business transaction, Caleb, not charity. It's your future, he said. My future is currently sitting in an account in Boston doing nothing, she said. While this ranch, which I have spent the past 6 weeks helping to build into something worth saving, is being threatened by a man who is counting on the fact that you don't have anyone helping you hold it together. Her voice was steady, not pleading, not emotional, clear. I am not sacrificing my future. I am choosing where to put it. Caleb looked at her for a long time. Hale, who had been watching this exchange with the alert attention of a man who had seen many negotiation tables, but rarely one quite like this, said nothing. Nathan said quietly, She's right, Caleb. Caleb looked at his brother. You're not helping, he said. I'm agreeing with the person who has been right about everything for 6 weeks, Nathan said. That seems like the intelligent position. A beat of silence. Walt, still in the doorway, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Caleb turned back to Eliza. If I agree to this, he said carefully, it changes the nature of your position here. Yes, she said. You'd be a partner in this ranch. A limited investment partner, she said. For 5 years. And after 5 years, the question landed in a different register than the ones before it. Both of them felt it. After 5 years, she said, we renegotiate based on what's true then. He held her gaze. Hale cleared his throat. If you'd like, I can draft the agreement today. It's straightforward enough that we can have it signed before I return to Helena tomorrow. Caleb looked at him, then back at Eliza. Draft it, he said. Hale had the agreement on the table by 4 o'clock. It was clean, specific, and fair. Eliza had said exactly what she intended, and Hale had translated it into language that left no room for misinterpretation. Caleb read it twice. He asked 2 questions, both of which Hale answered without hesitation. He signed it. Eliza signed it. Hale signed as witness. Nathan, who had been asked to witness as well, picked up the pen and paused for a moment, looking at the document, at his brother, at Eliza. 6 weeks ago, he said. This ranch was 6 months from losing the north pasture and probably everything attached to it. He signed his name. I want to say that for the record. Noted, Hale said, blotting the ink. Caleb looked at Eliza across the table. She looked back. Neither of them said anything. But something passed between them, the particular understanding of 2 people who have just made a binding commitment and are both sitting very still with the weight of what that means. Doyle's next move came faster than expected. 2 days after the agreement was signed and the loan payment drafted to the Helena Bank, a man appeared in Willow Creek, not Doyle himself, but a lawyer of his own, a younger man named Carver, who had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to delivering bad news in pleasant language. He arrived at the ranch mid-afternoon and asked to speak to Caleb. Caleb brought him to the kitchen. Eliza was there. She did not leave. Carver looked at her once, assessed the situation, and chose to speak as if she were not present. It was a strategic error, and she noted it without expression. Mr. Dawson, Carver said, my client has become aware that you've engaged a lawyer to challenge the water rights filing. He wanted me to convey before this goes any further that his intentions toward this property have always been neighborly. He regrets any misunderstanding. The filing wasn't a misunderstanding, Caleb said. It was deliberate. Carver's expression did not flicker. My client disputes that characterization. Your client is welcome to dispute it in a territorial court, Eliza said. Carver turned to look at her fully now. She met his gaze with complete steadiness. And you are, he said. Eliza Hartwell, she said. Investment partner in Dawson Ranch, and the person who identified the procedural violations in your client's filing. She paused. Specifically the failure to provide proper notice under Section 14 of the Territorial Water Rights Code and the backdating of the adjacent boundary survey, which I believe Mr. Hale has already submitted to the Territorial Court as grounds for dismissal. Carver was very still. You're aware, he said carefully, that making allegations of document fraud against... I'm not making allegations, she said. I'm describing what the documents show. The court will make the determinations. She looked at him with the calm of someone who has held a better hand than their opponent for long enough to stop worrying about it. Is there anything else your client wanted to convey? A pause. No, Carver said. Then I'll walk you out, Caleb said. He did. When he came back, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Eliza. Backdating of the survey, he said. Is that real? It's real, she said. I found it 2 days ago. I didn't tell you yet because I wanted Hale to verify it first. He confirmed it this morning. Caleb processed that. He's committed fraud, he said. Documentable fraud, she said. Which is significantly better than fraud you suspect but can't prove. A beat. This goes beyond the civil case, he said. Yes, she said. Hale is preparing to refer it to the Territorial Marshal's office. Caleb sat down. He looked at the table for a long moment. At the scratch in the middle that nobody had fixed. It's almost over, he said. Almost, she said. Not yet. The thing that Eliza had not yet accounted for could not have accounted for because it arrived from the direction she had been least watching, happened on a Friday morning. Roy Dawes came to her, not with the manufactured belligerence of the early weeks, not with the ground-level erosion of a man expressing his discomfort through small acts. He came to the kitchen early before breakfast when the other men were not yet up, and he sat down at the table with the expression of someone who has made a decision that cost them something. She poured him coffee without being asked. He wrapped both hands around the cup. I need to tell you something, he said. She sat down across from him. I was approached, he said. A month ago, before everything that's happened. A man came to me in Willow Creek. He said he worked for a property developer who was interested in this ranch. He offered me money for information about the ranch's operations, about the accounts, about when the loan payments were due. He stopped, looked at the cup. I said no. I want you to know that. I said no. She watched him. But I didn't tell anyone, he said. I should have told Caleb. I should have told Walt. I didn't. He looked up. I thought I was staying out of something that wasn't my business. I didn't understand. I didn't think it was as serious as it turned out to be. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Does Caleb know any of this? She said. No. Why are you telling me? She asked. Roy looked at her, the direct, uncomfortable look of a man answering a question he'd rather not. Because I've watched you for 6 weeks, he said. And I've watched what you've done here. And I've given you nothing but trouble because I was... He stopped. I didn't trust you. I didn't trust what you represented. A woman coming in from outside changing things. I've been on ranches where that ended badly. And now, she said. And now I've watched you fight for this place like it's yours, he said. Like it already belongs to you. And I think... He looked at the table. I think I was wrong about what you are. The kitchen was very quiet. You need to tell Caleb, she said. Today. Not through me. Directly. Roy nodded slowly. I know, he said. It doesn't make a legal difference now, she said. We have what we need without this. But he deserves to know, and you deserve to be the one who tells him. Roy stood up. At the door he stopped. Miss Hartwell, he said without turning. Yes. I'm sorry, he said. For the first 3 weeks. She looked at his back for a moment. I know you are, she said. Go find Caleb. He left. She sat alone in the kitchen for several minutes, turning the conversation over in her mind, feeling the particular texture of a problem that resolves itself not through strategy, but through a person simply deciding to be better than they have been. Her father used to say that in any crisis, the most important variable is not the enemy outside, but the people standing beside you. What they're made of. What they'll do when it gets hard. She thought about that for a long time. Then she got up and started the bread. Roy's conversation with Caleb lasted 40 minutes. She did not hear it. She did not try to. But she heard the quality of the silence afterward, the particular silence of a reckoning that has been absorbed without explosion. When Caleb came to find her, his face had the look of a man who has just added one more weight to a pile he's already been carrying and has discovered with some surprise that the pile is still manageable. He told me, Caleb said. I know. You knew before me. For about an hour, she said. I told him to come to you directly. Caleb looked at her. You could have come to me yourself, he said. It wasn't my thing to tell, she said. It was his. He was quiet for a moment. You're a very specific kind of person, he said. Is that a problem? Something moved in his expression. No, he said. It's the opposite of a problem. He started to leave. Caleb, she said. He turned. What are you going to do about Roy? He considered it. He said no when it mattered, he said finally. He told the truth when he didn't have to. He paused. That counts for something. She nodded. He left. She went back to the bread. The territorial court dismissed Harlan Doyle's water rights lien on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks and 2 days after Edmund Hale submitted the challenge. The dismissal came with language that was by the court's usually measured standards pointed. The judge had noted the procedural violations in terms that left little room for Doyle to claim innocent error. Hale had been in the courtroom. He sent a telegram to the ranch before noon. Eliza was in the kitchen when Walt brought the telegram in. She read it. She set it on the table. She did not move for a moment. Then she went to find Caleb. He was in the far barn, the one with the dark roan, the one she had walked away from weeks ago. She did not walk away this time. She went in. He was standing with his back to her, and he heard her come in, and he turned. She held out the telegram without speaking. He took it. He read it. He read it a second time. He put it in his shirt pocket. He looked at her. And Caleb Dawson, who did not show what he felt easily or often, who had spent 3 years managing his life with a precision that left very little room for anything that couldn't be practically addressed. Caleb Dawson exhaled. Long. Complete. The sound of a man putting down something he has been carrying so long, he'd forgotten the specific weight of it. "It's over," he said. "The lien is over," she said. "The marshal's office is still reviewing the fraud referral. That will take longer. But the ranch is safe. The ranch is safe." He looked at the telegram again through his shirt pocket, as if he could read it through the fabric. Then he looked at her. "Come here," he said. She walked toward him. He took her hand, not dramatically, not with the sudden urgency of a man swept up in a moment. Carefully. The way you hold something you are afraid to damage. His hand was rougher than anything she had held in years, and warmer than she expected, and she felt the particular shock of contact between two people who have been moving closer to each other for weeks, and have finally stopped pretending they weren't. "I've been trying to figure out," he said, looking at their hands, "how to say something to you without saying it wrong." "You said that before," she said. "I know." He looked up. "I still haven't figured it out." "Then say it wrong," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You came here as a stranger," he said. "And somewhere between the account books and the fence repair, and the way you talked to Thomas every morning, and the way you stood in that courtyard when I dressed Roy down somewhere in all of that." He stopped. Started again. "This ranch hasn't felt like mine since Clara died. It felt like something I was obligated to. Something I owed to the men and the history of it. I worked it because I couldn't stop working it." He looked at her directly. "Since you came, it feels like mine again. It feels like something I want, not just something I'm responsible for." A pause. "And I don't know how to separate those two things from you. I don't think I can." The barn was very quiet. "Caleb," she said. "I know your contract ends in 3 weeks," he said. "I know you have enough money now and enough reputation in this territory that you could go anywhere and find work." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "I'm not asking you to stay because the ranch needs you. The ranch will survive." "Then what are you asking?" she said. "I'm asking," he said, "because I need you to know that whatever you decide, staying, going, anything in between, it's entirely your choice. I'm not going to be another Gerald Hatch. I'm not going to make promises in a letter and then leave you standing on a platform with nowhere to go." He paused. "Whatever I am to you, I want it to be something you chose with full information." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the most careful man I have ever met," she said. "Is that a complaint?" "No," she said. "It's why I trust you." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not Clara," she said. "And I'm not trying to be. I don't want to step into a space that belongs to someone else." "You're not stepping into anyone's space," he said. "You've made your own." She absorbed that. "I need to think," she said. "Not about you, not about whether I want to stay, but about what staying means, what I'm agreeing to. I won't make a decision like this without looking at it clearly." He nodded. "Take all the time you need." "You need," he said. He let go of her hand. She walked back to the house. She sat in the kitchen for a long time, not looking at the account books, not making lists, not managing anything. Just sitting with a question that had no practical answer, only a true one. And the true answers she had learned were the ones that required the most patience to find, because they tended to have been there the entire time, waiting quietly for you to stop moving long enough to hear them. 3 days after the lien was dismissed, Edmund Hale sent a second telegram. The Territorial Marshal's Office had opened a formal investigation into Harlan Doyle's activities in the region. The fraudulent survey backdating was one element. But in the process of reviewing Doyle's filing records, the Marshal's investigators had uncovered something larger. A pattern of similar filings across 6 properties in 3 counties over 18 months. Dawson Ranch was not the only target. It was simply the only one that had caught the manipulation before it was too late. The other ranchers contacted by the Marshal's office had stories that were variations on the same theme, pressure legal maneuvering offers that seemed generous until you understood what you were trading away. 3 of them had already sold. 2 of those sales the Marshal believed could be challenged as having been made under fraudulent inducement. Doyle, Hale wrote, was facing more than a dismissed lien. He was facing criminal charges. Caleb read the telegram at the dinner table, surrounded by his men, his brother and Eliza. He read the relevant part aloud. The kitchen was silent for a moment. Then Billy said, and he said it with the complete, unfiltered sincerity of a 17-year-old who had not yet learned to manage his reactions. "He's going to prison." "That's what the marshal's office is looking at," Caleb said. Another silence. Then Thomas Briggs, 61 years old, who had been on this ranch for 18 years, who had watched Clara die and watched Caleb keep working, and watched the ranch hold on by its fingernails for 3 years, and watched a woman arrive with one suitcase and quietly rebuild something that had been breaking apart. Thomas set down his fork, looked at Eliza and said, "I'd like to make a toast." Everyone looked at him. He picked up his coffee cup. "To the woman," he said, "who arrived in June with $43 one suitcase and the most terrifying set of organizational skills I have encountered in 61 years. He paused. "And who managed to save this ranch, fix our accounts, feed us better than we deserved, and take down a fraud operation, all while making it look like housekeeping." A beat. Then every man at the table lifted his cup. Even Roy Dawes. Eliza looked at the table at Thomas and Billy, and Walt, and Roy, and Nathan and Caleb, and she felt something move through her that she did not try to name, or manage, or organize. She picked up her cup. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me stay long enough to be useful." "You were useful on day 3, Walt said. "Day 1, Thomas corrected. "Hour 1, Billy said, and then looked surprised at himself for saying it. The laughter that moved around the table was the real kind. Caleb, at the far end, watched her from across the room with the particular quality she had come to recognize as his version of saying something with everything except words. She looked back at him. Outside, something settled not just in the room, but in the shape of the thing they had all been holding together for 6 weeks. The threat was passing. The ground was still there. The people were still there. Everything she had come to call her own was still there. That evening, when the men had gone, and Nathan had taken himself thoughtfully to the far side of the property, and Walt had done his last walkthrough, and the house had gone to its nighttime quiet, Eliza went to find the one thing she had been putting off. She went to Thomas. He was in his chair near the kitchen window, the way he always was in the evening. She sat down across from him with 2 cups of coffee, and she said, "Tell me about her. Clara, tell me what she was like." Thomas looked at her. "Why?" he said. "Because she mattered to this place," Eliza said. "And because I'm not going to be part of something without understanding what came before me." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he began to talk. He talked for an hour. About a woman who had come to this ranch young and full of opinions, and who had learned to love the land the way you learn to love something difficult, not by being charmed by it, but by being challenged by it and deciding to stay anyway. About a woman who had known what this kitchen needed before she was done unpacking. About the way she had understood Caleb's silences, the way someone fluent in a language understands its pauses. About the fever. About the 3 days. About the morning after. About the scratch in the table made in a hurry, never fixed, kept deliberately. When he finished, they sat in quiet for a moment. "She would have liked you," Thomas said. Eliza looked at him. "How do you know?" she said. "Because the things she valued," he said, "were the things you have. She didn't value prettiness or position. She valued honesty, grit, the willingness to do hard things without asking for credit." He looked at her. "And she valued people who saw my coffee cup was empty before I had to ask." A long pause. "I'm not here to replace her," Eliza said quietly. "Nobody thinks you are," Thomas said. "Nobody could, and nobody should." He looked at her. But a house that held something good once knows how to hold it again. That's what houses do." She sat with that. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "Thank you," he said, "for asking. Most people don't." She took the cups back to the kitchen. She washed them. She dried them. She put them back where they belonged. And she stood in the kitchen that she had reorganized and stocked and run and defended in the house that held the memory of someone she had never met, and the presence of people she had come to know with a depth she hadn't expected, and she understood something that she had been circling for weeks. She had come west looking for work. What she had found was harder to name, more permanent, more frightening in the way that the best things are frightening, not because they might hurt you, but because they matter enough that you're afraid of losing them. She was no longer afraid of losing them. She was afraid of something simpler and truer, that she had found the thing she had been looking for before she knew she was looking for it, and that she was going to have to decide with full information and clear eyes what to do with that. 3 weeks remained on her contract. She had time. But some decisions she had learned don't wait for their proper moment. They simply become known. And she knew. She woke on the first morning of her final 3 weeks, knowing something had changed in her. Not in the situation. The situation was still moving. Doyle's investigation was ongoing. The marshal's office had sent a second inquiry, and Edmund Hale had written twice more with procedural updates that required her attention. The work was still there. The ranch was still there. The people were still there. What had changed was internal. The particular quality of how she held all of it. For 6 weeks, she had been running not physically, but in the way a person runs when they're managing a crisis. Forward momentum as survival strategy. Don't stop moving, because if you stop moving, you might feel the full weight of everything you're carrying, and if you feel the full weight, you might not be able to pick it back up again. She had stopped moving, and she had not collapsed. That she understood was the thing Thomas had given her 3 nights ago. Not just the story of Clara. Not just the permission to be present in a house that had held someone else's love before hers. He had given her something more fundamental, the evidence that she had survived the stopping. She got up. She made coffee. She put Thomas's cup on the side table. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the scratch in the middle of the table. And for the first time since she had arrived at Dawson Ranch, she smiled at it. Not sadly. Not with the careful reverence of someone honoring someone else's grief. Simply warmly. The way you acknowledge something that has earned its place. She had not replaced anything. She had added to it. There was a difference. Billy found her after breakfast, shifting his weight from foot to foot in the doorway, in the way he always did when he had something to say and wasn't sure he should say it. "Go ahead," she said without looking up from the supply ledger. "How do you know I have something to say?" he asked. "Because you've been standing in that doorway for 4 minutes, and you haven't asked me for anything yet, which means it's not practical." She looked up. "What is it?" He came in properly and sat down. "I wrote to my mother," he said. "I know, you told me." She wrote back. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced a folded letter worn at the creases from being opened and closed too many times. She said. He stopped. His voice had taken on the particular fragility of a 17-year-old trying to manage something that his composure wasn't quite big enough to hold. "She said she prays every night that someone is looking out for me out here, that I'm not alone." He looked up. "I told her about you," he said. "In my letter. I told her there was a woman here who notices things, who put bread on my plate before I knew I was hungry, who told me to write more." He folded the letter again. "She said to thank you." Eliza looked at him for a moment. "Tell her you're not alone," she said, "and tell her she raised someone worth looking out for." Billy's jaw worked. He nodded once quick and got up and left before the composure gave way entirely. She watched him go. She turned back to the ledger. She did not get any work done for several minutes. On the second day of the final 3 weeks, something happened that nobody had prepared for. Roy Dawes asked to speak to Caleb and Eliza together. They sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table that had held account books and telegrams and Doyle's polite letter and Edmund Hale's careful documents, and Roy sat across from them with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man attempting something that did not come naturally to him. "I want to stay on the ranch," he said. "Long term, if you'll have me." Caleb looked at him steadily. "You were planning to leave?" "I was thinking about it," Roy said. "After everything, after the way I behaved, the things I said, I figured I'd burned my place here." He looked at the hat in his hands. "But I've been watching what this ranch is becoming, what it's going to be, and I'd rather be part of something being built than go back to something that's already finished." A silence. Then he looked directly at Eliza. Not with the resentment of the early weeks. Not with the careful neutrality he'd adopted after the conversation at the fence. Something plainer. "I gave you trouble you didn't earn," he said. "You handled it better than I deserved, and I want you to know that I see that." Eliza held his gaze. "You said no when it mattered," she said. "And you told the truth when you didn't have to. That's not nothing, Roy." He looked at Caleb. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You're not going anywhere," he said simply. Roy's shoulders dropped a half-inch, the specific physical release of a man who has been waiting to hear something and has just heard it. "Thank you," he said. He put his hat back on and left. Caleb looked at Eliza. "You're not surprised," he said. "I've been watching him for 3 weeks," she said. "When a man starts repairing things he didn't break, he's decided to stay." Caleb studied her. "You notice everything," he said. "I notice what matters," she said. On the 5th day of the final 3 weeks, Edmund Hale arrived in person. Not with good news exactly, with news that was significant and required a decision. He sat at the table with Caleb and Eliza and laid it out plainly. The territorial marshal had built a case against Doyle that was strong enough to proceed to prosecution. The fraud was documented, the pattern was established, and 3 of the other affected ranchers had agreed to testify. The evidence Eliza had assembled, the procedural violations, the backdated survey, the lien filing timeline, was the foundation the entire case rested on. The marshal's office wanted Eliza to submit a formal statement, a detailed signed account of how she had discovered the fraud, what documents she had found, and what the timeline looked like from inside Dawson Ranch. "It would be submitted as evidence," Hale said. "It may be read in court. It would be on the public record." He looked at her. "There's also a possibility," he said carefully, "that Doyle's defense will attempt to challenge the legitimacy of the discovery, specifically whether you had proper authorization to access the financial records you reviewed." Eliza looked at Caleb. Caleb said, "She had full written authorization, from the day I gave it to her." He looked at Hale. "I have the document." "Good," Hale said. "That closes that argument." He paused. "I want to be clear about what I'm asking. Submitting this statement puts Miss Hartwell on record as the primary person who uncovered the fraud. It may draw attention she hasn't previously had. It will name her publicly in connection with a criminal prosecution." "Does it help the case?" Eliza said. "Substantially," Hale said. "Does it help the other ranchers, the 3 who already sold? It may be the difference," he said, "between them recovering something and recovering nothing." She did not hesitate. "I'll submit the statement," she said. Caleb was watching her. "Are you sure?" he said. She looked at him. 3 families lost land they may be able to get back," she said. "I'm sure." Hale produced paper and pen. She wrote the statement that afternoon. 4 pages, precise and chronological, citing every document with its location and date, describing every step of the discovery with the same clarity she had brought to every other problem this ranch had faced. She signed it. Hale reviewed it. "This," he said, "is the most organized evidence submission I have received in 30 years of practice." He looked at her over the top of his glasses. "Are you absolutely certain you've never studied law?" "My father taught me that documents are the only things that don't lie," she said. "Everything else can be misremembered or misrepresented. Documents are what happened." Hale folded the statement into his case. "Your father," he said, "was a very wise man." "He was," she said. "He just trusted the wrong person once. That's all it takes." The day after Hale left with the statement, Nathan found her in the kitchen and sat down without preamble. In the 3 weeks since his arrival, he had changed in ways that were visible if you knew what to look for. The defensive edge had quieted. The specific restlessness of a man who has been arguing with his own past had settled into something more purposeful. He worked hard and asked for nothing, and had begun in the small daily ways to rebuild something with his brother that had been dormant for 4 years. "I'm going to stay," he said. "On the ranch. Caleb's offered me a permanent position." "I know," she said. "He told me." Nathan looked at her. "Of course he did." He turned his coffee cup. I want to ask you something directly. You don't have to answer. Ask, she said. Are you staying? He said. After the contract ends. She looked at him for a moment. That's between me and your brother, she said. I know, he said. I'm asking anyway. Because I've been gone for 4 years, and I came back to find this ranch different from what I left, not just operationally. Something in the way people move through the house. The way Caleb comes to dinner. The way Thomas laughs. He paused. That's you. And I want to know if it's going to last. The directness of it caught her off guard. I don't know how to answer that without talking to Caleb first, she said. Then let me say it differently, Nathan said. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that you have my respect, completely, without condition. He looked at her. I came back here ready to dislike you on principle because I assumed anyone my brother trusted after 3 years of trusting, no one was either taking advantage of him or being taken advantage of. He paused. I was wrong on both counts. She held his gaze. Thank you, Nathan, she said. He stood. For what it's worth, he said at the door. Caleb has been trying to find the right words for something since approximately the night of the telegram. I've known that man for 30 years. When he runs out of practical things to do, he's usually about 36 hours from saying the real thing. He left. She looked at the door for a moment. Then she went back to the accounts. The real thing came on a Tuesday evening. The accounts were balanced. The supply orders were in. The statement was filed. The ranch was running with the smooth, confident rhythm of a place that had found its footing again. The men were settled. Nathan was settled. The threat from Doyle was moving through the legal process where it belonged. There was no crisis to manage. There was only this: the last 10 days of a contract and 2 people who had been working beside each other for 63 days and had run out of practical things to hide behind. Caleb found her on the porch, not in the kitchen, not at the table, not in the specific geography of work that had defined most of their interactions. She had taken her coffee to the porch for the first time, his territory, the place he went to think, and she was sitting in the second chair, the one that was always empty. He came and stood near her. You're in my chair, he said. She looked at him. I'm in the other chair, she said. Yours is still available. He sat in it. They were quiet for a moment. Your contract ends in 10 days, he said. I'm aware. I've been trying, he said, for the better part of 2 weeks to have a specific conversation with you. And every time I start it, something happens that requires both of us to be somewhere else doing something important. Nothing is happening right now, she said. No, he said. It's not. He turned in the chair to look at her fully. I told you, he said, that I wasn't going to be another Gerald Hatch, that I wasn't going to make promises without meaning them. You told me that, she said. I want to make a promise, he said. And I want to make it slowly enough that you understand exactly what I'm saying before you decide anything. She turned to look at him. I'm listening, she said. He held her gaze. I want you to stay, he said. Not as the housekeeper, not as the investment partner, though that remains the most sensible financial arrangement I've ever signed. Not because the ranch needs you, though it does. He paused. I want you to stay because when I imagine the next 10 years, the work of it, the difficulty of it, the good parts and the parts that will be hard, I cannot make the picture make sense without you in it. She did not look away. That is the most carefully constructed declaration I have ever heard, she said. I practiced it, he said. She almost laughed. Caleb, she said. Yes. I decided 8 days ago, she said. He was very still. I decided the night Thomas told me about Clara, she said. I sat in that kitchen afterward, and I understood something that I had been managing not to understand, because it was easier to keep it in the category of professional complications. She looked at him directly. I love this ranch. I love what it is, and what it's becoming, and the people in it. And I have been honest enough with myself in the last 8 days to acknowledge that I cannot separate that from you. You're not a component of the place I've come to love. You're the reason it feels like something worth loving. Caleb looked at her with an expression she had not seen before, stripped of all the careful management, all the controlled stillness. Something open. Something that had been held behind the door for 63 days and was now quietly finally being allowed to exist in the room. "You decided 8 days ago," he said. "Yes. And you didn't tell me." "You were still building toward it," she said. "I didn't want to take that from you." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You are the most specific person I have ever met." "Is that a complaint?" "No, he said. "It's the truest thing I know about you." He reached across and took her hand, the same careful way he had in the barn, with the same quality of a man holding something he refuses to damage. She let him. They sat on the porch in the Montana evening, and neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence was the best kind, the kind that doesn't need anything added to it. Jameg. The final days of the contract passed with the particular quality of time that moves differently when you've stopped trying to manage it. There was still work. There was always work. Eliza finished the quarterly account review and passed it to Hale for the bank documentation. She trained Roy at his own request, with a humility that continued to surprise her on the supply management system she had created, so that the household operations had resilience independent of any single person. She wrote detailed notes on every arrangement she had made with every supplier, every preference of every ranch hand, every system she had built from the wreckage of 3 years of no system at all. Not because she was leaving. Because she had learned from her father's collapse that the things that matter most should never live in a single person's head. Caleb watched her do this. "You're documenting everything," he said one evening. "I always should have been," she said. "I was managing from memory. That's a risk." He looked at the pages she had written. "You're building something that outlasts you." She looked up. "I'm building something that lasts," she said. "The outlasting is the point." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "It is." On the last day of the contract, Eliza woke before anyone else, the way she always had, the way she suspected she always would. She made coffee. She put Thomas's cup on the side table. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the room that had been a wreck 8 weeks ago and was now simply a kitchen, a real one, with a history of good meals and difficult conversations and decisions that had mattered. She heard the household coming awake around her. Thomas first, then Billy, who had been writing to his mother twice a week and whose general quality of being in the world had improved measurably. Then Walt, then Roy, then the others, then Nathan. The sounds of a working ranch morning, every one of them familiar now in the specific way that familiarity becomes after long enough, not habit, but recognition. The sound of people you know. Caleb appeared in the doorway. "Today's the day," he said. "It is," she said. He came in properly and sat at the table. "I have something to ask you," he said. "You've already asked me," she said. "I've already answered." "Not that," he said. "Something different." She turned from the stove and looked at him. He was sitting at the table with his hands flat on the surface and an expression she recognized from the barn, the day of the telegram, the open one, the unguarded one. He looked slightly nervous, which was the most human she had ever seen him. "I want to ask you properly," he said. "Not in the middle of a crisis, not over account books, not with the ranch on fire around us." He paused. "I want to ask you when everything is quiet and everything is all right and there's nothing requiring either of us to be anywhere else." She waited. "Eliza Hartwell," he said. "Will you stay on this ranch? Not as housekeeper, not as investment partner, not as the woman who saved us from Harlan Doyle." He looked at her steadily. "As my wife. As the person this place belongs to, as much as it belongs to me." He paused. "As the person I want standing beside me for everything that comes after this." The kitchen was completely still. Outside she could hear Billy and Roy starting the morning work. She could hear Thomas settling into his chair. She could hear the sounds of the ranch. Her ranch she understood now, in the way that places become yours, not through deed or documentation, but through the labor of your hands and the love of your attention. She looked at Caleb Dawson. 63 days ago, she had looked at this man on a train platform and decided based on very little information, and a very clear reading of his character, to trust him with 3 months of her life. She had been right. "Yes," she said. He stood up. He came around the table and took both her hands and looked at her with everything he had not said in 8 weeks, visible now in his face, all of it unmanaged, unguarded. The full accounting of a man who has found something he did not believe he was still capable of finding. "I don't have a ring yet," he said. "I'll add it to the supply order," she said. He laughed a real laugh, the unguarded kind she had heard from him exactly twice before. She had decided months ago that she would spend a significant portion of her life making sure that laugh happened more often. She understood already planning for a future. The news moved through Willow Creek. The way news moves through small towns, faster than the people carrying it, slower than the people waiting for it. By the end of the week, everyone knew. The responses were what they were. Some people were surprised. Some people had seen it coming from the moment Eliza walked off the platform with her suitcase. A handful of people had the grace to revisit the opinions they had held on the day she arrived. The woman at the edge of the platform who had said she was too soft, too Eastern, not made for frontier life, and to find those opinions less defensible than they had seemed in June. One of those people came to the ranch. Her name was Margaret Holt. She was the woman who had said loudly enough to be heard that Gerald Hatch couldn't be blamed for turning Eliza away. She arrived mid-morning on a Wednesday and asked to speak to Miss Hartwell. Eliza came out to meet her. Margaret Holt was a woman who had lived a long life on the frontier and had developed opinions with the efficiency of someone who doesn't have time to be wrong very often. She stood at the edge of the property with her hat and her spine, and the specific expression of a woman who is doing something difficult without making it look difficult. "I said things," she said on the platform, "in June, about you." "I heard them," Eliza said. "I know you did." She was quiet for a moment. "I was wrong." Eliza looked at her steadily. "You were working with incomplete information," she said. "That's not the same thing." Margaret Holt studied her for a moment. "You're more generous than I would be," she said. "I've been wrong about people before," Eliza said. "I expect I will be again. It makes it harder to hold other people's mistakes against them for too long." A silence. Then Margaret said, "There's a woman in town, Rebecca Starr, arrived last month. She's in a similar position to the one you were in. Employer changed his mind. No connections here, nowhere to go." She paused. "I told her to come and speak to you. I hope that's all right." Eliza looked at her. "Send her Tuesday," she said. "I'll have coffee ready." Margaret Holt nodded once. She started to leave. "Mrs. Holt," Eliza said. She turned. "Thank you for coming," Eliza said. "It wasn't easy." "No," Margaret said. "It wasn't," and walked away with the posture of a woman who had done something right. Harlan Doyle was formally charged by the Territorial Marshal's Office on a Thursday morning, 6 days after Eliza's contract officially ended. The charges included 3 counts of document fraud, 2 counts of obtaining property through fraudulent inducement, and 1 count of deliberate interference with water rights filings. Edmund Hale sent a telegram before noon. Caleb read it aloud at dinner. The kitchen received it the way it received most things now, together with the specific weight of people who understood what it meant because they had been in the room when it was happening. Thomas said, "Good." Billy said, "What happens to the ranchers who sold?" "Hale believes 2 of the 3 sales can be challenged," Caleb said. "It won't be quick, but it's possible." "Because of the statement," Walt said. Looking at Eliza. She said nothing. "Because of the statement," Caleb confirmed. Roy at the far end of the table was looking at his plate, but she noticed him nod once, small deliberate. His own private accounting. After dinner, Nathan stopped her in the hallway. I want to tell you something," he said. "Go ahead." "When I met with Doyle," he said, "he told me this ranch was failing because Caleb was too stubborn and too alone to make good decisions." He paused. He was right about one thing. Caleb was alone. He looked at her. "He's not anymore." She held his gaze. "Neither are you," she said. Nathan was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "Neither am I." He went back to the main room. She stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the house around her. The walls and the lamplight and the sounds of 12 people and 2 brothers and 1 small family Bible that had traveled from Boston to Montana in the hands of a woman who had nowhere left to go. She had somewhere now. 3 months after Eliza Hartwell signed the contract that changed everything, she and Caleb Dawson were married in the yard of the ranch they both called home. The ceremony was simple. Thomas stood beside Caleb. Nathan stood beside Caleb on the other side. Walt organized the men with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been running logistics for 18 years and was not going to let a wedding break the streak. Billy had written to his mother 2 weeks before to tell her the news, and his mother had written back a letter so warm and generous that Billy had read it 3 times, and then gone and done an extra hour of fence work, because he didn't know what else to do with feeling that much. Roy had polished his boots. Eliza wore a dress that was not the worn blue traveling dress. This one was the color of the Montana sky in early morning, a color that existed in the territory of between neither quite one thing nor quite another, which suited her completely. She carried the small family Bible. When the minister asked Caleb if he would take this woman, he said yes, with the directness of a man who has spent weeks finding the right words and has finally understood that the right word is the simplest one. When the minister asked Eliza the same question, she looked at the man beside her, the quiet cowboy who had watched from a distance when everyone else walked past, who had offered honest work when charity would have been easier, who had said a person doesn't need to belong somewhere before they arrive, and had meant it in every direction it was possible to mean something. She said yes. And that was the story. Or, rather, that was the beginning of the real one, because the story of 2 people who are right for each other does not end at the ceremony. It continues into the mornings that come after, into the working days, and the difficult seasons, and the small private moments that nobody outside the house ever knows about. Into the conversations at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low. Into the particular silence of 2 people who have learned to be in the same space without filling it unnecessarily. Into Tuesday mornings when a new woman arrived with a suitcase and nowhere to go, and Eliza Hartwell Dawson had coffee ready. Into the account books, and the supply orders, and the fence repairs, and the letters sent to Helena, and the ongoing, unglamorous, essential work of keeping something alive. Into Thomas Briggs, who lived 3 more years on the ranch, and never once had to walk across a cold room for his coffee in the morning. Into Billy, who went home to Ohio the following Christmas, and came back with the particular ease of a young man who has proven to himself that he can leave and choose to return. Into Nathan, who rebuilt something with his brother that neither of them had believed was still there to be rebuilt. Into Roy Dawes, who became over the years that followed one of the most trusted men on the property. Not because he was perfect, but because he had proven at a specific moment when it mattered what he was actually made of. Into a ranch that had been losing itself quietly for 3 years, and found in the space of 8 weeks everything it needed to become something that lasted. And into Eliza herself, who had arrived in Willow Creek on a summer afternoon with $43, 1 suitcase, a small family Bible, and a letter promising a beginning that hadn't yet happened. Who had picked up her own suitcase when no one offered to help. Who had said to a platform full of people who had already decided what she was, if this place doesn't want me, I'll build a place that does. She had been right. She had built it. Not alone, never alone, because she had understood from the beginning that no good thing is built alone. But with her hands and her mind and her specific irreplaceable way of seeing what people needed before they knew how to ask for it. She had built it, and it had held. Years later, the people of Willow Creek would still tell the story. They told it the way that communities tell the stories of the people who shaped them. Not precisely, not without embellishment, but truly in the way that truth survives its own retelling. They said there was a woman who came west as a stranger, with nothing but what she carried and what she knew. And what she knew was enough. And what she carried was more than it looked like from the outside. And the cowboy who saw that when no one else did wasn't lucky, he was paying attention. And paying attention, it turned out, was the beginning of everything. They said she came west with nowhere to go. They said she chose where she was going, and she built it with her own hands, and she stayed. And she was home.